We're just about to start the next session in a full long day summit for Everyone Deserves Happiness. We've come together today on the International Day of Happiness to really center the conversation around autism and well-being, to bring happiness to the forefront of the conversation. And what better place to talk about happiness than in the gaming community? So we are honored and privileged to have Zack Siddeek and Lynn Fiellin with us, who are going to talk about a place where millions of people gather around the globe to play video games and what impact that can have on their well-being. We at Proof Positive are honored to work with Zack and Lynn in many capacities. Zack is graciously on our advisory board and helping us think through sort of how to explore and expand and live into our mission more broadly. And Lynn is partnered with us on, I'm guessing, a project we're going to hear about today, which is how do we embed the science and skills of happiness into video games. Her lab does amazing work ensuring that video games are evidence-based. So we are privileged to call these folks friends of Proof Positive, and you're going to learn lots today. Zack, over to you.
Awesome. Thank you, Katie. And thank you to Proof Positive for, making this happen. I'm very excited to talk about, video games and autism, which are my two special interests. And so let me hit the magic slide button so you can see my bio slide. So I grew up in Western Colorado and was diagnosed with PDD-NOS back in, I think it was like 97, 98, back in the old days. And, just growing up was difficult. It was, hard for me to find folks to relate to. I was probably like one of the first people ever diagnosed in my school district. They had to, I think, fly out a psychiatrist from Denver about 4 times, and he made me line up blocks and ask me very serious questions, like if I could, if I was like stranded on a desert island, what would I bring with me? Who would I bring with me? And I told them it was a very silly question because if I was stranded and had time to, prepare ahead of time, like the two just don't line up. And based on answers like that, I was diagnosed with autism. And just related to, really struggling to, relate to the people around me. I just ended up playing a lot of video games. I'm still a gamer. I've built like 4 different gaming computers over about 15 years. And I also just have like a drive to create community for autistic people wherever I go. And so sort of related to that, I got my social work degree over at the University of Washington, man, almost 10 years ago now. I'm feeling a little old just looking at this. Right now, I work as the Disability Systems Navigation Coordinator for the ARC of King County. I'm here on my own time, and the opinions I state may or may not be the official opinions of the ARC. We'll see. Right now, I'd say my favorite video game is Elden Ring. I probably have like 200 hours in that. But my 2 most played games on Steam as of like 2 days ago, Crusader Kings 2, which has 1,298 hours. The runner-up is Crusader Kings 3, which has 1,236 hours. So yeah, I really like grand strategy games. I will say a lot more words later on, but I'm not the only one here presenting. So Lynn, who are you and what are you doing here?
Well, thank you, Zack. And can everyone hear me? I have the same fear that Jessica expressed earlier about talking to myself for 30 minutes and no one there. Thank you. I'm really glad to be here. It was great to work with Zack on this. So my name is Lynn Fiellin. I am a professor at Dartmouth College, and I'm founding director of a lab called Play to Prevent, which is now based at Dartmouth. And at the lab, what we do, my interdisciplinary team does, is working with young people really from day one. We develop and evaluate evidence-based digital health games that focus on a range of health outcomes and interests and concerns for young people, primarily teenagers. We use rigorous methods, we co-design with young people, and most recently, and what I'm here, we'll talk with you about, is our team has partnered with Proof Positive with the goal of working with autistic youth and their families to develop a digital health game that promotes happiness and well-being for these folks. So I'll talk to you about that a little bit more, but I'll hand it back to Zack. Thanks.
Awesome. Looking forward to that, Lynn. So great. This is the part where I tell you all what I'm planning on talking about. So yeah, I'm going to talk a lot about like why are so many autistic people gaming or just like hanging out in online spaces. going to talk a lot about sort of like the macro level factors of like how do the societal perceptions of autism impact why so many autistic people are gaming, whether that be online gaming or like tabletop gaming, or there's probably other forms of gaming out there that I can't think of right now. I'll talk about what even is gaming, what games are autistic people playing. And then, I also have ADHD as well, so I may or may not go off topic, and I may or may not have taken my ADHD medications this morning. So we're going to find out where things are going. It's going to be very, very exciting. But please, like, if, I say anything that's interesting, or you're looking for like more me to like expand on things, please use the question and answer feature in chat. And if we get off topic on really interesting tangents, like that's the objective. Absolutely. So cool. So, Lynn, you already talked a little about what you're going to talk about, but do you want to expand on it at all?
Yeah, so what I'm planning on covering is, again, our Proof Positive partnership and the project that we are working on developing a research-driven digital game for autistic youth and their families. Why this project matters. This is really not something that I need to, argue for with this group, but really looking at what research says about the well-being gap that we see, the role of games and co-designing with autistic youth, and then how we're doing it and really what our game design approach is. Thanks, Zack.
Awesome. Thank you. All right, so let's dive into it. I'm sure many of you know, just like what the research says about how autistic people are treated by society, what autistic people have been saying for years about it. We face a lot of like really unhappy things like, social ostracization, bullying. It's unfortunately something I went through a lot as a kid. And so it just, creates all of these circumstances where like we have to find escapes. We have to find places where like we can belong, where we feel like we're not like burdens on society, where we, feel like we can be valued for our accomplishments and our achievements. And, just because of that, a lot of us just end up going to like online spaces, could be like Discord, could be, like online video games like World of Warcraft. I think that's still alive, or Helldivers, or, Call of Duty. And there's definitely like some spaces that are more like conductive to like forming communities, or, making friends compared to others, like, MMORPGs like World of Warcraft, or that's the main one that just keeps coming to mind. Those allow for community to exist. Minecraft's another really common one where, there's a lot of autistic people playing, as you can see on the image on the right side here. That's the autism creature, which is one of the many official, unofficial mascots of autism, for a variety of reasons. But really at the core of it, like most people, autistic people, one community, we want friendships, we want to feel like we belong. And gaming is just a way to sort of like avoid the isolation and, try to make meaning through the trauma that we might encounter in life. And so, it's important to talk about like why is this happening? There's a lot of different reasons. That would probably be a 3-hour talk, and I only have about 20 minutes. So I'm just going to really do simple abstractions by looking at the medical model of disability versus the social model of disability. It's probably something folks here are somewhat familiar with, so I'll be, quick enough on it. But the medical model of disability basically, looks at autism as very similar to a disease like COVID, cancer, or diabetes. If you can see the bus ad at the top right of the screen here, this was on buses put on by Seattle Children's Research Institute about 10 or 11 years ago. And it's an image of a smiling boy that says, let's wipe out cancer, diabetes, and autism in his lifetime. Like, just great. As someone who loves going to autism conferences, I love just tracking all of the times that, autism is described as similar to like a disease. Feels great. And just like, imagine you were this smiling boy right here is autistic themselves. How are they going to feel about that message? How are they going to feel about like their autism, their brain, when, society provides, often very negative messages about autism and about whether or not we belong and whether or not we feel included. And so then we also have to look at like historically and like currently, how, like what do we do about that quote unquote like autism problem? How do we, solve it? Do we help autistic people act non-autistic? Do we help autistic people, find joy and meaning and happiness, in ways on our own, on our own terms in ways that work for us? And historically, and in a lot of ways currently, autism's been very entrenched in the medical model where, since autism, can't be cured and, in my opinion, probably shouldn't be cured, like a disease, then the solution is, oh, we just treat autistic people to like hide signs of our autism, because like success means being indistinguishable from our peers. And well, like being able to pass as non-autistic can be useful in some circumstances because like, stigma and discrimination very prevalent in, especially in places like job interviews or like getting interviewed by the police. Like, in those circumstances, it's a like survival mechanism. And so, those times we got to do what we got to do. But, a lot of autistic people will just be masking like 24/7 constantly. And what we now know from the research is that one of the biggest predictors of suicidal ideation in autistic people is that amount of energy we're spending like hiding our autistic traits, and when the suicide rate is, I think it's about 8 times greater than the general population, according to the studies I've seen. Like, it's a really big deal. So we got to look at like how do the social expectations we have of autistic people, and how do the social expectations we, society puts on autistic people and people who just like behave differently. What it how does that serve us? And oftentimes we know from the research now it doesn't, and it causes like anxiety and depression, which oftentimes are counterproductive to finding happiness. So in terms of thinking about like what are better ways to like think about autism, oh, and I should also before I jump on that, then we also have to look at like how is the research around like autism and like video game usage like entrenched in the medical model of disability. Um, the research I saw was primarily through the lens of like gaming addiction, amongst autistic people in very sort of like stark and depressing ways. And, many of the studies I saw didn't necessarily consider things like the social causes of autistic people, playing a lot of video games. They were just looking at autism through a very deficit-based pathologizing lens. And, just continued to sort of like replicate the harms that are often caused to autistic people in research. So we've got the social model of disability, and where like, the medical model of disability says like disability only exists within the person's body and mind. The social model of disability basically says like disability is an interplay between the person's body and mind and the society around them, both the physical environments, the sensory environments, and the social expectations we have. And so, I love the social model. It doesn't just put the burden of change on the autistic person. It really puts the onus on the world and on, society to be accommodating to autistic and disabled people as well. And, so that we're able to meet in the middle and that disabled people and autistic people aren't, just burning ourselves out trying to exist in the world. Because that's another reason why a lot of us game is autistic burnout. When like the research says the autistic brain at rest consumes about like 30% more energy than a non-autistic brain. And we know autistic people are spending so much more energy in every single social interaction, whether it be at the workplace or just, trying to drown out really, really loud noises or like bright fluorescent lights. It just means like we're exhausted at the end of the day. We're not going to be able to like go out with our friends and like hang out at bars and clubs or, use the executive functioning that's often required for planning social activities because we're just exhausted already. And so it just means like, yeah, gaming is a very common reason as to like why we end up, a lot of us end up playing games. Same here for me as well. And so there's this, reflected in like the medical model of disability and the social model of disability, there's this tension between like, how should video games be talked about when it's talking about autistic people? Like, is it solely for, improving our quote unquote like social skills deficits or removing our like, restrictive, repetitive behaviors and all of that? Could it be used to find community and belonging, with autistic people and just help us find positive environments where we can be celebrated for who we are? there were just like diametrically sort of like opposing really like viewpoints between like how research described autism in video games and like how autistic people, playing video games were just talking about playing video games. And like, sure, don't get me wrong, like video game addiction, absolutely a real thing, absolutely something that impacts a lot of autistic folks negatively, and does need to be addressed. But at the way, sort of like the rate it's being looked at and the fact that the majority of studies are still in a very like pathologizing lens, it just continues to sort of like lead to that mismatch between what autistic people want and where the science is often going. And I've already talked a lot about, the dangers in like over pathologizing autistic people, but, just imagine like what autistic kids are going through right now. Like, they've got 8 hours of school a day, and then maybe they've got like an hour of therapy appointment. Maybe it's like, mental health therapy, occupational therapy, or like speech or ABA. And then maybe, might go to like sports teams or something like that. It just means we're going to be very exhausted. And, there's a danger in just therapizing autistic children too much, not giving us any opportunities to rest, because we know like, hey, when we're already using all of that energy, it's just going to lead to autistic burnout later on. Oh, one study I saw that, I think summed up, I think the way I'd want to see the research go is linked here. It says tabletop role-playing games, so like D&D, can provide a safe space for autistic adults to engage in meaningful social interactions with like-minded individuals. On a totally like anecdotal note, like I have been in like 6 D&D groups over, my life, and I would say at least 5 of the dungeon masters in those groups were autistic themselves. The vast majority of people in those groups were either like autistic or neurodivergent. So in addition to like video games, like tabletop RPGs are a very common way that autistic people find community with one another. And honestly, the vast majority of those DMs did not know they were autistic, which it's always funny to see. And it is sure the way we interact with people is going to be different. That's not necessarily a bad thing. The way like we socialized in like the D&D groups, much different. We were much more focused on the game rather than just sort of like the social chit chat. And that's totally fine. We all got what we needed in the end. And that's really what's most important. And, in terms of thinking about like, how do online spaces play a part in this? There's a really great sort of like anthology of essays called, I think it's Autistic Community and the Neurodiversity Movement. I believe Stephen Kapp was the main editor of that. It's a free PDF. Take a look. It has a really great sort of like history of autistic culture and community. And I'm just going to summarize some of the things here. So really early on in like the 1990s to 2000s, a lot of autistic people were finding one another through like IRC relay chats and like, BBS boards, just as a way to really escape the very deficit-based pathologizing lens that existed about autism in the 90s. And yeah, just thinking about the messages that were being spread around autism back then, it does not surprise me. A lot of the folks were, described being like very socially isolated and just like struggled relating to other folks around them. Often similar to today as well. And, that is really where we saw like autistic community and autistic culture really start to form. Probably one of the biggest pieces of like early autism self-advocacy literature is the well-known poem Don't Mourn for Us by Jim Sinclair, written back in 1993. And just a really profound just like poem that's pushing back against, seeing autism solely as a deficit-based tragedy. And then, moving on from the 90s and 2000s, you started to see more sort of like forums dedicated to autistic people, forming. Probably the most well-known one is Wrong Planet, that was created back in 2004. And then, after that, like Facebook, and MySpace became really, really major. And then a lot of autistic community and culture formed there. And there were a lot of really great autism Facebook groups that autistic people were able to connect with others on, and it was a good thing. And, nowadays, since Facebook isn't as popular, seems like Discord is like the main place where like autistic people are, finding one another and finding culture and community and belonging. I also run a series of meetup groups called the Square Pegs for autistic folks in Washington State, and we've got about 5,000 members and about 24 groups happening each month, so it keeps us pretty busy. And right now, like autism community, it's changed a lot. A lot of folks are on TikTok now, and to an extent, Instagram. I haven't really found very much, conversations about autism and gaming in those spaces compared to some of the others. And Minecraft, though, is probably the main place where autistic people are like, connecting with one another and forming, communities and cultures. There was one really great article written by a college student named Lena Cahill, who described, communication, just a combination of stimming and communication as a way of autistic people expressing themselves in online spaces, and gaming spaces. It could be through like art, it could be through like the games they're playing, or it could just be through the emojis we're using to express ourselves. And it's really cool that these, spaces are very like empowering to autistic people. And I also realized that, the most of the previous slides have not had enough photos for the ADHDers in the audience. So we'd like to apologize to you all. And we're now going to look at some really nice photos of things autistic people have created through Minecraft. So let's look at this. This is from the Yachtcraft server, probably the best known Minecraft server for autistic folks. We've got, someone who looks like they're from Dragon Ball Z, a floating jellyfish, and just a bunch of really cool people. I like it. Minecraft really allows for a lot of creativity. So we've got Hello Kitty over here on the left. We've got a minion who appears to be lifting weights. That's very, very clever. Here, I think this was for the 10th anniversary of Yachtcraft. They spent some time creating, I think that's the symbol of the Heartless from Kingdom Hearts, I want to say. Interesting. And oh, what's this? Okay, that's weird. It's a dolphin. I don't know what that person's doing with the dolphin. Kind of awkward. We're just going to move on and oh, okay. Maybe not everything autistic people create on Minecraft should be celebrated. So we would like to apologize to the audience who might have found the previous images disturbing. We're so sorry. So let's now spend some time looking at the well-known autism game called Satisfactory. For those of you who haven't played Satisfactory before, it's a game where you are basically sent to an alien planet to build really, really big factories, complete with train systems, conveyor belts, and really, really, really cool machines. Someone might ask me, how do I know that autistic people created wonderful things like this? And my answer is, it takes like hours to create, like 20, 30 hours to create things like this. And what kind of person is going to spend all of that time, creating such wonderful train-based transportation systems? It's autistic people. So look at this, lovely. We've got examples of really complicated conveyor belt systems in action here, and some really nice examples of architecture that happens. And oh, okay, it's a little disturbing. Someone just stacked a lot of smelters and created a giant spaghetti-like conveyor belt system. That's exciting. And oh, okay, that's kind of terrifying. I don't know what's going on here. I'm sorry. And I don't know what to make of this. This is, yeah, this is a lot. I'm sorry, folks, if those previous images were disturbing. Yeah, let's, to avoid any awkward moments, let's just sum up my part of the talk. Really, at the key of all of this is, autistic people just want to find like community and connection with one another. We just want to, belong and find meaning. And, online spaces and gaming can be a great way of expressing ourselves, even if some of those ways may look a little, little strange. I'm not going to judge too much. So yeah, just help autistic people find community and belonging with one another. And I think that right there is just the key of, the key of success for autistic people playing video games. And if you want to follow up, send any emails, this is my email address. So awesome. I will turn it over to you now, Lynn.
Thank you, Zach. That's awesome. Now I'm going to try the tech side of things here, which is always the biggest challenge. Okay, you can hear me, you can see me?
Yeah, you sound great.
Okay, terrific. So thank you, Zach. That's awesome, and it's a lot of food for thought to think about, sort of what we may want to do in creating a digital game that can help autistic youth and their families learn the skills of happiness. And so that is what I'm going to talk about today. I gave a little bit of a brief overview already in terms of what I'll cover. Again, our Proof Positive partnership and the project that we have launched, why this project matters. And I'm going to run through a number of different areas to answer that question, and then how we're going about doing that. And that includes our game design approach and how we use stories in our games. And this is something that I heard over and over again this morning, people talking about stories and the power of stories. And it is something that has evolved into being a critical part of what we do when we develop games. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. So this is our project and the partnership that we have with Proof Positive, Level Up Happiness, which is, again, a partnership between Proof Positive and my lab, Play to Prevent. And through this project, we will develop a research-driven digital game to support happiness and well-being in autistic teens and their families. We will create with and for autistic youth, their families and communities through every stage of this project. And we will leverage Proof Positive's curriculum and our lab's expertise in digital health game development. So to just talk a little bit about our lab. So the Play to Prevent lab has been around for about 16 years. It was previously at Yale University. It's now at Dartmouth College. And these are really what I see as the three most important components of what we do in producing our digital health games, which really come out in the form of real video games. They are developed by our game development partner, who is a commercial game developer. So they are truly video games in all sense of what video games are. So a key part and probably our major priority is youth and community co-design. So as I said before, we partner with young people to ensure our games are culturally relatable and authentic through their stories and through their voices. We conduct rigorous trials, so we test what we've created to make sure that we've actually accomplished what we set out to do, and then we share those findings. And then we collaborate and focus on broad access and scale. So the idea is that our games in general, and the one that we're developing right now through the Proof Positive project, we really need to get them into people's hands so that they can have impact. And that's a major focus of what we do. We have a solid track record in this approach. Again, we've produced 5 games. We've reached hundreds of thousands of young people, and we've been able to demonstrate with rigorous methods that our games work. We produce data to show that we're having the intended impact. And that's really key, because we can all say that games or video games seem really cool, but if they actually don't accomplish what we want them to accomplish or they need to accomplish, then we haven't created much more than just a game, which of course has inherent value, but we're looking to do more than just entertainment, more than just a game. So why focus on happiness? So this, again, is not an argument that I need to make with this group or on this day, the International Day of Happiness. But really, when we're thinking about what we want to produce, this is kind of, forefront in our mind. So as we've heard today, autistic youth often report lower overall well-being than their peers. Many existing interventions focus on reducing challenges versus actively promoting happiness and positive life skills. And I think that's really front and center as we're looking to shift that paradigm and really focus on the positive, focus on happiness, focus on the strengths with what we're developing. And in many ways, and we've had this experience with our other games, is that what we hear from people is that video games can be really joyful. Gameplay is really joyful. Play is really joyful. And so to be able to deliver this content and this skill building through gameplay right there, you add a layer of positivity with a greater likelihood of, creating happiness. And then positive psychology research shows that skills like gratitude and strengths reflection can improve learning, happiness, and well-being. So that's really, where we're focusing. And so why use games to support learning in autistic youth? Well, Zack really nicely walked through, some of this discussion, as did earlier speakers today. But, research has shown that well-designed games can increase engagement, motivation, and learning. They provide opportunities to practice skills in safe spaces. And they've been shown to lead to improvements in social, cognitive, and emotional skills. So, not only do we see that, young people gravitate towards games and video games, but they also have all of these assets and potential power in terms of, what kids learn, in a whole range of different areas. So there's a lot of support for the value of using games to address learning in autistic youth. And why co-design these games with autistic youth? So as I mentioned before, this is really the biggest priority in the way our lab does our work, in terms of starting with young people and going through every step of the process with them to design, develop, evaluate, and then ultimately implement these games so that they have the greatest impact they can. But research shows that autistic youth can meaningfully participate as co-designers in game development by, and these are key, acting as storytellers. I mean, this is really, we want this game to include themes and stories and ideas and things that are important to the folks that we want to impact. So, having autistic youth act as storytellers, the users, the testers, the informants of what goes into these games, how it goes into these games is absolutely key. They can help shape game rules, mechanics, learning content. They can provide feedback during every step, including prototype testing. And the results of this co-design, what has been shown is that there's demonstrated increased engagement and sense of ownership in what's created. Games that are more relevant to autistic youth, real experiences, see improved usability and accessibility. And in creating games, with autistic youth, for autistic youth, these games can provide clear goals and progressive skill scaffolding, rewards and feedback loops to sustain motivation, avatars and role playing to help simulate real interactions. So these, games are really built in so many ways for learning and really learning for people with all different kinds of learning styles. So there's something very unique and powerful about the use of games in this area. And so our approach, and as we're looking towards building the Level Up Happiness game, is, our design and development includes, as I mentioned, co-designing with autistic youth and their families and building from their stories. And I do want to highlight here that this project is really our first entree into including families in this process and building something with families for families. Up until this point, our other 5 games really focused just on the youth, but we have now seen time and time again, and the literature also supports this, is that families are incredibly important to young people in terms of their development, in terms of as a protective factor. And so, we very intentionally are building this game with families, with parents, caregivers, siblings, a major focus on siblings to get their input and their stories in what we build. We're going to include the powerful elements of proof positive curriculum and content. We are going to conduct our game development with our game development team at Filament Games, who is a very creative, successful game development team, a studio with strong ties to the neurodiverse community. In the game, autistic youth will practice key well-being skills through engaging repetitive gameplay, including focusing on gratitude, strengths reflection, and joyful movement. These are all parts of the proof positive curriculum and really lend themselves to translation into gameplay. And families will engage through, and this is still to be determined because this is what we're going to be talking with kids and their families about, potentially asynchronous gameplay, potentially some synchronous gameplay. But we'll really focus on building family relationships, building their awareness of their child's strengths and encouraging the use of their child's strengths. So again, making this about all members of this family, the child, the teen, and their family unit to really enhance a strength-based approach and focus on happiness. So this is our project game plan, if you will. So we have sort of 3 goals that we've outlined. We're going to co-design the game with young people, their families, other key stakeholders, develop this iteratively with Filament Games. We will pilot pilot test the game with, again, a new group of teens and their families and refine based on their feedback. And then we'll evaluate the game's impact on targeted outcomes. We've nailed down a range of outcomes that we're interested in looking at, and a major one being happiness. And what really struck me this morning when Katie was talking about, outcome measures around happiness, this is a major area that we would like to focus on and thinking about, what could we do in this project to move the field along in terms of measuring happiness in kids with autism. So that is also one of the goals. So at this point, our next steps is we have actually are engaging our project advisory groups, which include autistic youth, their families, individuals who work in the field, and we're going to be having continued sort of more formal discussions. We've spent a lot of time just talking with folks more informally, but we are now going to move into more formal focus groups and interviews. We'll begin our co-design process with young people and their families, and then we'll develop and test this game and then pilot it and refine it for a broader evaluation. So stay tuned. Hopefully the next time we have this summit, I may be able to present some more actual data and results from this project. So just to say thank you, and I don't know if we have time for questions, but happy to.
You guys rock. Thank you. And Lynn, I like JD's presentation on strengths and wanting to incorporate in lots of different ways. We should roll her into conversation. I think you were in her session earlier today.
Yes, I did. Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. I know, such good food for thought.
So much good to sort of consider and think about. Zack, you closed with such a simple statement, like autistic people just want to belong. We just want community. Seemingly simple. It's like, why are we having to host a 12-hour summit? Why are we continuously like beating down the door to go, really? There's only research on gaming addiction. There's nothing on the prosociality of social media for people with autism. I posted in the chat, I don't know if you saw, I opened this morning with the fact that this year's World Happiness Report that dropped yesterday is the 15th World Happiness Report, and the 15th in a row to not mention the word autism a single time. And this year's is actually completely on social media and happiness. And had they looked to the autism community, as you pointed out, they might have actually been able to dig even deeper into the nuances of how different people interact on social media. And so what a missed opportunity.
Yeah, I think I agree. It's like, there's often this very restricted way of how do we think people should be like socially interacting with one another? Like, what do we think friendships are going to look like? And it often discounts like friendships formed online and, through games. And, unfortunately, I'm not surprised to hear like autism wasn't mentioned. I'd wonder, was disability even like mentioned in any of those happiness?
No.
Yeah, like that. I feel
In
like
one
that's really,
report, there was a citation that had disability in the title.
oh, no, that's great to have one mention, right? That's like 100% more than the last time. So yay. I think it's one of those things where like disability just really isn't thought of unless it like directly impacts the person or like maybe they got family members. And it's the thing with the policymakers or, the people writing those reports. They don't necessarily see disability as something like worth thinking about or, talking about. And I feel like there's often this fear of like, oh, I might suddenly become disabled. So I just want to sort of like put that, thought away, in my mind so I don't have to think about it. And it's like, disabled people can absolutely be happy. Like we can find, community and belonging and fulfillment from one another. It's same with autistic people. And, maybe for autistic people, there could be a bit more of a challenge because like, autism can be an invisible disability. And a lot of us, a lot of people won't know someone's autistic just by looking at them. And that makes it harder to like form friendships with one another. But I just keep coming across all of these like places, like, workplaces or like friendship groups where like the vast majority of folks are autistic or neurodivergent and don't even know it. And so it's like we're able to find one another even if we don't know it, and we're able to form community. So there, there's hope, there's happiness, but it takes a lot more work than non-disabled, non-autistic people for sure.
Yeah. It's when we started Proof Positive 5 years ago, there was 0% of my brain thought that we would have to invest work in sort of telling people that happiness and autism was possible. Like to me, that was just such a basic assumption. That all people can be happy, that all people deserve happiness. Like I never thought we'd have to host a 12-hour summit saying that everyone deserves happiness. And what digging into this work in this way has shown me is that we absolutely have to. And in fact, we need the people that are writing the reports, that are driving the policy, that are measuring the progress of society to know that those 1.3 billion people count and they can be happy. And we should actually be learning for, as Harry just told us, there's a lot to learn about sort of all from autistic people. You're telling us there's a lot to learn about sort of how to engage meaningfully in a social media platform or in a gaming community from autistic people who are doing it really well. And so I think that's awesome. Patricia, I don't know if there were questions in the chat. I could steal Zack and Lynn's time.
Yeah, I just wanted to share with you one comment from an individual and just shared because I just think it's important. And they just shared that they were a late diagnosed gamer and how exhausting it is and how, gaming has always felt like a safe space. And then they shared, I loved Minecraft even before I was diagnosed. So I kind of giggle, Zack, because you probably loved gaming too. So it's really looking for community and finding it in gaming, just validation for everything that you shared. And then Katie, you if you have questions, go for it.
I would just love to sort of, Zack, you mentioned that these are two of your special interests, and I would love for you, in more than questions, like advice. Give us advice. I know that you and Lynn have been talking about her game development, but we are obviously invested in this space and figuring out how to be a part of the solution. So, words of wisdom on sort of how we can do this well.
Yeah, I mean, I think, y'all have probably heard the saying, like when you've met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person. And so there's a great sort of like variability in like how gaming might be used by autistic people and how accessible it could be. And, in terms of like thinking about the folks who often need to find the happiness the most and have the most barriers, it is most often like non-speaking or minimally speaking autistic people or those with intellectual disabilities. And often, I have not heard very much conversations about like how do we include folks like that in games, or how do we make games accessible for that? Like I've got a good friend who's a non-speaker and had like co-occurring motor conditions as well. And so it's like, he can't like can't really like hold a controller, also can't really focus long enough to play games as well, but just likes being around games when they're being played. And so it's just like, what is how can we make games or just like experiences for folks like that are that'll be meaningful. And I think like VR potentially could be a great way forward into that. I'm not sure if there's any research being done there. And then we also, of course, have to look at like, there's a very significant like economic barrier into like getting into gaming, and when we know like, I don't know what percentage of autistic people are unemployed, I've seen as high as 80%, means a lot of us aren't going to be able to afford video games. And so we have to think about like, what do we do for folks in those circumstances? Like, can the games be like free or like easily played on like even low power like smartphones and all of that? So I think just really engaging with the sort of like the diversity in the autistic community is, I think, what's most important, for sure. It's a great question.
Yeah, I love that. Lynn, I know that your lab, which Patricia and I have been so impressed by your team already, and we're in such early stages, are really digging in and have done some stakeholder interviews. And I'm curious, sort of as novel folks in the autism work, sort of just getting into this autism space, what your early read is on how possible it is to make this game accessible to sort of a wide range. Because Zach, I hear you. It's like the people with the greatest barriers that need these games the most are often not who we're solving for. So Lynn, it's sort of curious to hear what the conversation in your lab sounds like.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that we've talked about quite a bit because we do, it's, and, as Zach just said, you meet one autistic person, that's one, and there's obviously huge diversity just in humans, but true with this population as well. And so it's trying to strike a balance, especially at this phase of things, to be inclusive enough, but not try to be everything to everybody so that you end up being nothing to nobody. Like it's really kind of, again, the hope that, wherever we start will help inform the learning for the greater population, because we've experienced that with different kids just in game projects we've done where there's such a range of learning styles, learning capacity, and so it's trying to strike that balance, but talking to folks, especially talking with folks who work in the field and have autism. I mean, it's like that's a gold mine, right? Like you just wish you could climb into their brains and just get them to drive the car, because it's like there are all these little sort of magic pieces of information that I think can have huge impact, and
Well,
it's just trying to
they could build us like an entire conveyor belt system.
Right. Exactly. Right.
Yeah.
And so but it is, it is a challenge to figure out how to strike that balance so that you're, again, being inclusive enough without kind of losing the forest for the trees, I guess.
Yeah, we do it with our work as well, whether it's a presentation or a PDF or a lesson that we're preparing for teachers to be able to teach students. It's how do you make it engaging and modifiable as well. So it's
right. Exactly. So we take a deep breath and we go.
Yeah. Well, and as we have said at Proof Positive, like, our founders were very generous. And with their first dollars, we could have sort of gone, well, there is no research existing on happiness and autism. So we're going to spend these millions on running, trials and doing research and proving.
Right.
And Patricia and I are sort of pragmatic by nature. And we're like, whoa, no. We've been in this field way too long to like go, we're going to do more research and wait. If we know these tools work, and we've heard it all day long, autistic people want and find happiness the same ways everyone else does. So it's reasonable to assume that gratitude could be helpful, that strength spotting could be helpful. And so we sort of went, we don't have time to wait another decade. Let's just start building this thing, and we'll learn as
Right.
we go, and we'll listen to people, and we'll engage with the community. And I think today's
That's right.
proof that it
Yeah.
works. Building the plane in the air is
Yeah.
we
Kind of difficult to
need
do.
solutions.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. And we take the things that we know do work,
Yeah.
you know, and we piece things together.
And then we just say evidence informed.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, and you take it to those steps to just sort of, you know, again, but to start from scratch and not use all the history and all the things we've seen have impact is silly and you know, waste time and waste, you know, people's input. So.
And missed opportunity for impact. All right.
Right.
We are super thankful you guys are here. I hope that you will hop to our next session with us. Jody Wilson is fantastic. She is our first presenter from Australia.
I know. What time is it there?
Well, don't make me do backwards math. I've been staring at my screen for 11 straight hours. Zach, Lynn, thank you. For those of you that are joining us for Jody, she is just an amazing wealth of knowledge and lived experience around the topic of well-being. She has made me think in lots of different ways, and I'm sure the next hour will be fantastic. So